to get one of the student questions
Sure.
online. This is from Matthew Vieira. Please raise your hand. Okay. Since I have a Hispanic heritage, I'd like to know what you think about immigration reform and the Dream Act.
Yeah. I was asked this question the other day at the debate. They said, well, how is it compassionate that we have people who are in this country illegally and then we would separate them from their families? And I said, my answer was, you know what the greatest, most compassionate thing that the government in this country has? What makes this country different almost than any other country in the world is that no one is above the law. That's what makes us compassionate. Because if we decide, well, some are subject to the law and others, then we become like almost every other country in the world, where it's who you know, what connections you have, in order for you to be able to succeed in America. But that's never been America. America has always been about, historically, the rule of law. And the fact that the president is above the law, is held accountable. No Supreme Court justice, and by the way, no illegal immigrant is above the law. That's what makes us successful. It's what makes us America, in large part. Here's what I would say about the issue of immigration. The issue of immigration should be treated no differently than any other issue that we're dealing with. So I just laid out a tax plan. When I laid out a tax plan, what was my message to you as to why you should adopt this, why you should support this tax plan? Well, the message was that it's in the best interest of America, right? This is in the best interest of the country. Wouldn't you say that should be the standard of every law we have in America? No matter what the law is, the law should be in the best interest of America and the American people. Anybody disagree with that? Okay. Why is immigration different? And in fact, it is. In fact, if you look at the debate on immigration, the issue is not what's in the best interest of the American public or Americans. It's what's in the best interest of the person who broke the law. What are we going to do about it? If I got up here and gave you a talk on my tax code and said, really what we should be worried about is the person who cheats on their taxes and making sure that we aren't too hard on them, how would you respond to that? Not very well, I would suspect. And for good reason. So I look at the immigration system as one that is consistent with all other American laws, which is we have a system that works for America, and that it is compassionate, as I've talked about before, that it works to help the people who are most impacted by it. Right? So we have a tax code, and we want to make sure the tax code works for the families that have to pay the taxes, or the businesses that have to pay the taxes, that makes it work best. The same is true with immigration. Well, let's look at the facts of immigration. Over the last 20 years, there have been 35 million legal and illegal immigrants come into this country. 35 million. That's more than any 20-year period in the history of our country. You can say, well, that's a good thing or a bad thing, and you can. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. What is the composition of most of the people who come into this country? 70 to 90%, depending on who you believe, of the people who have come into this country in the last 20 years are wage earners, lower skilled workers. All right? So if you're going to look at who has been most impacted by the 35 million workers who have come into this country, well, you would probably say, who do you need to look at? Who would be most adversely impacted? Wage earners. And so what's happened to wage earners over the last 20 years? Well, over the last 25 years, wages have flatlined. Wages are barely keeping up with inflation. In fact, last quarter was the lowest wage growth in the history of our country. Wages have gone up less than a nickel an hour per year. The slowest wage growth ever in a 25-year period. You look at who's getting jobs in America. Since the year 2000, between 2000 and 2014, which was the last numbers last year, there were 5.7 million net new jobs created in America. What percentage of those net new jobs are held by people who were not born here? The answer, all of them. There are fewer native-born Americans working today than there was 15 years ago. Even though there's 17 million new native-born workers net in the workforce. So you can say, well, immigration's been a good thing or a bad thing for the overall economy, and there's certainly numbers to argue both ways. But if you look at the folks who are most directly impacted, which is American workers, and remember I started out my talk, who was I talking about? Who feel like their chance of succeeding isn't better? Who feel like they have no chance to go up? Who is discouraged about their future, their kids' future, and America's future? It's American workers. And so we have a system that brings in, last year, 1.7 million new workers into this country. 1.7 million, almost all of whom are unskilled or low-skilled workers. To compete against the very workers who feel like that. You want to know why there's anger and frustration? That's one of the reasons there's anger and frustration. Even programs designed to bring higher skilled people into this country, like the H-1B program. You've probably heard of this. H-1B is a highly skilled worker visa. They bring in $65,000 a year. Well, we found out earlier this year that two companies, Disney and California Edison, brought in a total of about 1,500 workers, about 750 each, who brought in basically computer programmers. In the case of Disney, they brought in 700 people, had them come in, had the existing workforce train them in their jobs, and then fired the existing workforce and replaced these people who would work for 30% less. Now, that is not an immigration system that's working for America. And so what I've suggested is that we have to go through a process of putting immigration laws in place that actually work for America. So what do I suggest? What I suggest is that we have roughly 12 million people who are in this country illegally. Half of them, according to the numbers, roughly half are here on visa overstays. That means they came to this country legally, but because we have no tracking of exits, let me repeat that. We track people who come into this country, but we don't track people who leave because we don't care. Let me repeat that. We don't care. We don't track exits. We don't even tell people to leave. And it's no wonder that people are staying because they have no requirement to leave. So to eliminate half of this untenable problem that people talk about, you simply need to locate the people who you know their name, you probably know where they are, and you need to let them know that it's time to go home. That's half of the problem. The other half of the problem is solved by E-Verify, which is a system that says that people who work here illegally will be checked, their social security number will be checked by all employers, and if they're not legally here, they can't hold employment in this country. The second piece of it is legal immigration. We have over 1 million legal immigrants coming in this country a year. Again, almost all of whom are unskilled, and at a time when, well, there's not an explosion of unskilled worker jobs being created in America. So what I've suggested is to get rid of two categories of legal immigration. One is something called the visa lottery system. The visa lottery system is for primarily third world countries. This happened in 1990. We identified certain third world countries and made immigration possible on a lottery basis. So we don't interview, we don't determine who we want, it's available by lottery. I will say that I don't know of anybody in Washington now who wants to keep this system. I think everybody realizes this is not a way for a rational immigration system to function, which coupled with the visa lottery is a big problem. Because chain migration says that when you come into this country, not only can you bring your minor children and spouse, but you can bring your adult children, your brothers and your sisters, and your parents. And once they come, they can bring their brothers, sisters. So by one person, you create a chain of literally hundreds, if not thousands of people because someone won the lottery. This is not a rational immigration system. And so if you eliminate those two programs, you cut back immigration to a level that is still historically the highest in the history of the country, but it's back to a level of about 750,000. That's what I'm proposing. I'm the only person in the field that is proposing those two things, to deal with both illegal and legal immigration. Everybody else either wants to increase legal immigration, or have some form of allowing people who are here illegally to stay. So I provide an alternative to that.